Welcome to the Midi Quest video tutorials. If you've just purchased Midi Quest, odds are this is the first tutorial that you're going to look at, so thank you for purchasing the software. This first tutorial, I'm going to take you through the basics of Midi Quest, getting started, each of the major windows, essentially how they work, how to use them, and from there you can look at any one of the number of additional tutorials that we've done that are specific to a particular window. Each of these larger tutorials is anywhere between half an hour to an hour long, but we cover just about everything that the window is capable of doing. I'm going to start here by running Midi Quest, and the first thing that will happen is Midi Quest will ask you to choose the ports that you're going to use with the program. Now that is all of the MIDI ports that you plan to use with Midi Quest for all of your instruments, not one specific instrument, but all of them. So these are the MIDI in ports. These are the ports that you want Midi Quest to be able to receive sysx data from. You can choose ports by clicking on a single one, clicking and dragging, or you can make extended selections by holding down the control key and toggling on and off the ports that you want. Press the OK button, and Midi Quest will now ask you if you want to choose MIDI out ports. Say yes, and this time you will get a list of the available MIDI out ports for your computer. Again, choose all of the ports that you want Midi Quest to be able to use and press the OK button. At this point, Midi Quest will normally ask you for your name, company, and serial number. I've already had the program installed once, so Midi Quest is not going to ask for this information. And Midi Quest will now normally ask you to enter your name and serial number. I've already run the program a number of times, so that information's been stored in the computer. Next, what will come up if you have purchased the CD version of the program is a list of all of the instruments that are available to install. They're all listed in alphabetical order by company. You can simply select all of the instruments that you want to install. A single click on each instrument will add your selection to what's already there, so you don't need to hold down the control key or anything to make extended selections. And press the OK button to install those instruments into your studio. If you have purchased the download version of Midi Quest, then if this window appears, it will be blank. Just press the cancel button, and what you want to do is go to the studio menu and choose install instruments from SoundQuest website. And here you have a number of options to work from. You will normally want to press the All Instruments button, and that will give you a list of all of the instruments that are available for download and installation. Alternately, you can click on this button and it will list just the instruments that have been modified since Midi Quest was released. Again, select the instruments you want to install. There is no need to hold down the control key for extended selection. and press the OK button to install those instruments. Now in my case, I don't want to take the chance of overwriting older versions on top of work I already have here, so I've chosen to add instruments that I already have installed, and I have all of Midi Quest instruments installed on my hard drive. So I'm just going to go in here and choose a couple, and let's get the venerable DX7 as well. I now have a number of instruments installed, and at this point what you need to do is configure each instrument so that Midi Quest is able to talk to that instrument. Now, one of the things you can do, and you can optionally have this happen automatically, is do something called auto sense. And what will happen here is that Midi Quest will actually go out and attempt to find the instrument automatically, and it will configure 3 settings: the MIDI in port, the MIDI out port, and the COM channel automatically for you if you are successful. This kind of operation is actually very difficult for the computer to do. Often the instrument is fine, but it needs to be set up. I wouldn't always count on this operation being successful, and myself personally, I choose to set everything up manually. So for each instrument, select it, hit the settings button. In here you need to select the MIDI in port for the computer, that is the port where the instrument is sending data to, so that MIDI Quest can receive information from it, and the port that sends data to the instrument so that you can update it. The COM channel is the channel that the instrument uses to communicate sysx information on. Now that is usually not the MIDI channel, although it can be in some cases. And for some instruments, there is no COM channel used at all. Alesis being a prime example of that. So set the COM channel if needed. Set the MIDI channel. Now the MIDI channel is typically just used for auditioning purposes. So that is the channel that you want to send out note on and off events to, so that you can hear the instrument play while you're working on creating a new sound. Patch number, you'll find, is usually grayed out, but some drivers use this to allow you to specify additional information. So you could have a driver or a component that requests a particular patch, say out of a bank of 128 patches. In here you would be able to specify the range somewhere between 1 to 128 to specify which patch you want. Patch bay control you can read about in help if you are using a patch bay. Now that is an old style patch bay, not a multi-port MIDI interface. If you're using a multi-port MIDI interface, do not use this portion of the settings. So you need to set this up for each of your instruments. Do the settings for your O&W, settings for the M1. Once you have all of your instruments configured, just go and save your studio. These settings are normally saved each time you exit the program, but just for safety, you can save them right now. I've talked a little bit about configuring your instruments, but some instruments have their own quirks. And to deal with this, we've created what are called fast tips. And the fast tips is a text file, and there is typically one for every kind of data in an instrument. So the DX7 has one, but the motif with all of its different components will have a number of different fast tips files. And what is most important about these is that they will tell you what you need to do to set your instrument up so that Midi Quest can talk to it. For example, if you have Korg instruments, by default, in virtually all Korg instruments, the unit is shipped with sysx communication turned off. That means that without going and doing some work on your instrument, Midi Quest will not work. So, O1W, get the fast tips. And as it says, sysx is disabled. To turn it on, you need to go to the global menu, go to the MIDI filter page, and set the exclusive option to enabled. It also tells you what you need to do with your MIDI channel setup. You want to set the MIDI channel to match the global MIDI channel on your global page. So the fast tips are on a per instrument basis, and they are very important and very useful in allowing you to set up Midi Quest properly to work with each of your instruments. Once you do have each of your instruments configured, you can start loading data. Now you can do this a number of ways. One way, you can just click this mini button, which is the same as clicking this button for the active instrument, and what you will load is selected here. In this case, it would be the default set. Now that's typically all of the RAM data in your instrument. So it would be the voice bank and the current voice in the case of the DX7. For other instruments, there is a lot more data to load. Or you can alternately choose a component. You could choose to load just a voice bank, or just a voice from the DX7, or just a combi bank, or just a combi from the O1W. If I press the receive button, a new window opens, and Midi Quest has loaded in the current voice bank from the DX7 and the current voice. Once you have, you should do this for each of your instruments. Once you have successfully loaded data from a particular instrument, go to the File menu with its window active, choose Save Set As, and I would call the set factory, or a good descriptor of whatever it is that you've currently loaded out of the instrument. You want to save the data from the instrument before you start making changes so that you can always get back to where you were. With Midi Quest, it is entirely possible for you to wipe out the entire contents of the RAM area of your instrument. So you want to back up the instrument, get the data saved on your hard drive before you start playing around with Midi Quest. Now, with that said, we do our best to stop you from wiping out the entire contents of your instrument, but it is possible for you to go in and define an entire bank of patches as null and then send that bank down to the instrument, because that is something that you might want to do at some point in the future. Now, the other way that you can load data from an instrument is to first create a new set, so you can either press the new button here or the new mini button here. And what this does is it creates a new window of data. And this is very useful, particularly when you have an instrument, say like the motif, where there is a lot of data to load, and it's possible that a single glitch at some point in the load process and the download stops, and then you have to start over from the beginning again to get that data. So you can say choose your performance bank, and then you want to load the data for your performance bank. And you can do this simply by pressing the Get button here, or right click and you get a pop-up menu, and you have an option here to say Get Performance Bank. And as you can see, the data is slowly loading in because there's quite a bit of it. And here is a situation where it stopped loading. Now, instead of having to reload everything, I can, on some instruments, select a portion of that bank and choose to just load that portion. And as you can see, there is a lot of data, and Midi Quest buffers are, I believe, getting filled up. So what I did there is I went into the MIDI import selector, and there are two additional parameters there. One specifies the number of input buffers available to Midi Quest on a per port basis, and the other specifies the size of each of the buffers. Now, the reason that we give you this flexibility is that different instruments can have different buffer requirements. In the case of the motif 6 here, and by the way, the reason that we're having problems receiving is that the software that we're running to actually record this is using up so much of the computer's processing time that Midi Quest is actually not getting enough time itself to reset the buffers to load from the instrument. So I'm going to stop my attempt to load in the remainder of the buffer of the patches here. So we will start watching the data come in, and as you can see, Midi Quest has already stopped receiving at 912 bytes. So I'm going to cancel out of here, and this actually allows me to highlight a number of issues that you may very well face yourself with your system. Your computer will frequently have problems initially receiving sysx depending on the MIDI interface you're using and the instruments you are attempting to work with, and a number of other factors. Now with Midi Quest, we do our best to give you options to work around these problems. So when you look at MIDI imports, you have two parameters here which control how Midi Quest is able to receive system exclusive. There's number of buffers and there's the buffer size. If you're using a Korg instrument where the dumps are very large, if you see messages that say sysx missing bytes, odds are that your MIDI interface is not running fast enough to cycle through the buffers and correctly store all of the sysx data that's coming in from the interface. What you need to do in this case is increase the buffer size, preferably to a size that is larger than the largest dump that is coming from the instrument. That way, all of the sysx is stored in a single buffer and you get rid of the error. So for older instruments, say like a Korg M1, you might want to try a buffer size of, say, 40,000. And you can actually reduce the number of buffers that you need to use to, say, 3. If you're looking at a more recent Korg instrument like a Triton, I would recommend bumping that up to 80 or 90,000. And even there, you're going to end up using multiple buffers to receive that sysx data. Now the motif has the opposite problem, where it sends lots and lots and lots of small messages to make up a single voice or single performance or whatever the type of data is that you are trying to load. Roland also sends tones and patches as a series of small messages. Now right now I'm recording all of this audio and video at the same time as I'm trying to work with Midi Quest, and chances are very good that even with me using the maximum settings, that is 127 buffers, and I'm going to bring the buffer size back down to say 2000. I may not be able to receive this bank simply because the amount of processing weight being placed by the audio and video on the system won't allow the sysx to be received properly, but I'm going to give it a try. So we'll take those settings and we will once again try and get our performance bank. So keep that in mind. If you notice, the data is, well, we've got 13,000 bytes. That really isn't enough, and we've got a fair bit in. I'm going to use this opportunity to show you extended selection. Not all banks can do this, but in the case of the motif, we can work on and bring in just part of a bank. And no, there's just too much processing going on to be able to receive this much data from this instrument. So what I've just done here is stop the recorder and loaded in the remainder of the performance bank. I could then go through, load in my voice bank for user 1, user 2, get my drum bank. Once I have all of this data loaded, go to the file menu and save my set for this instrument so that I can work with it safely. What I will now do is close this window up, and I will use this third button here to open up an existing set that I've loaded from the instrument. And you can see here, there's your performance bank, voice banks, all of the preset banks from our Motif ES. There's a voice editor, our drum bank, drum editor, and so on. I touched on this earlier, but I'll reiterate it here. The set is probably where you will spend a lot of your time working. A set is a representation of the entire contents of the instrument, and the set has a number of very special capabilities that are not found in Midi Quest when you work with a bank as an individual entity or a patch editor as an individual entity. An example of this is our performances, and if I point to any particular performance, if you look down in the lower left corner of the video, you'll see a statement. Dynasty uses preset 3 voice, A16 background, EO8 Symphony, preset 3, A16 background, voice, and so on. So Midi Quest is actually able to smartly tell you what voices are being used by a particular performance. And if you watch that lower left corner, as I move the mouse over the various performances, you'll see the list change to indicate which voices each performance is using. So Midi Quest has some real smarts there. And the reverse of that, if I choose a voice bank, you notice that some of these have little yellow tags up in the upper right corner. These tags indicate that this voice is being used by a performance. So if you're about to add a new voice to this bank and you want to make sure that wherever you add this voice, it's not being referenced by a performance, you can look here and go, these ones are being used. I have all the remainder of the voices in this voice bank. I can put my voice in one of these and not have it interfere with the performance bank. Also, again, if you look in that lower left-hand corner, as I point over various voices, you'll see again Chinese is used by blank. But if I point over Orango, you'll see Orango is used by sitar. Electric drum is used by happy hour. And this one is used by power drive and iFacto. This is the reverse. In this case, that little comment area is telling us which performances are actually using this voice. Again, a very useful, important piece of information to have when you're working with an instrument that is as large and can be as complex as the Motif is. Midi Quest can even go one step further than that, and you'll see that if I take metal loop and say I want to rearrange this bank, and I drag this patch up to a new location, first thing that happens is those two voices have been swapped in location. So you don't lose a voice, but you are able to move your voices around, put them wherever you want. And it takes a few seconds, but notice that metal loop now contains its marker to show that it is being used by another performance. And more importantly, if you go and find that performance, new lover, you would actually see that Midi Quest has changed the reference in the performance so that the new lover performance correctly references metal loop in its new location. So you can actually go in, rearrange all of your voices, change their locations, and Midi Quest will correct your performances so that they continue to reference the right patches in the right locations. Midi Quest also, if you were to take a performance from this performance bank, create a new set and drag a performance over, Midi Quest would not only move the performance over, it would also move over all of your RAM voices so that the performance maintains its integrity within the new set. So, if I just minimize this down and I create a new set, and let's use happy hour as an example. Here's happy hour. If I drag this and I drop it into location 40, I come over here, I've got my happy hour, and not only do I have happy hour, but I also have the two RAM patches or voices that happy hour is using. It's put them in new empty locations within the voice bank, and if I open up happy hour, the program references have been updated here and here so that they correctly refer to the voice bank where the patches or voices are now located. Again, this makes dealing with your instrument much, much easier than trying to remember what the links are, where they are, making sure that you don't break any of them as you work with and reorganize your instrument. Let me close up this, and we'll just return to this editor here. Actually, let me recreate this set again. I want to show you a couple of things that I've just glazed over. New to Midi Quest 10 is the ability to load individual elements into a bank. So if I want just 3 patches, I can choose those 3, press the Get button, and I missed just a little bit of the last one. So there, I've got a full Latin jam now. And as you've heard, as I've talked, clicking on different patches will actually audition them. Now, if the contents of a patch is defined, then what Midi Quest does is it actually sends that patch down to the instrument and then auditions it. If the patch isn't defined, then Midi Quest instead just sends a patch change down to the instrument and allows you to listen to it that way. So if I create a set that has all my RAM plus ROM banks, and I can do that just by choosing RAM plus ROM from the sets here, and I create a new set. Now I have all of my ROM banks listed, and if I want to audition through each of those, I can do that very, very easily. Now the sound you're hearing is defined up in the preferences under tones, so you can specify up to 16 tones. You can specify how long that audition happens, and you can specify each of the notes. And you can actually also decide from the bank edit whether this is played as a chord or as a sequence. And in some cases, a chord or a sequence might be more appropriate for whatever kind of sound it is that you're looking for. I'm just going to close that window back up, come back to here. Now the nice thing about these partial banks is that if you have maybe just 5 or 10 sounds that are being used by a song, you now have the option of just loading up those 5 or 10 sounds, bring them into your bank, load in whatever performances it is that you need, and leave it at that. Now when you come back to Midi Quest to reconfigure for that particular song, you're not sending the entire bank down to the instrument. You're just sending those 4 or 5 or 10 sounds that you actually need, which is much, much faster. It saves you a lot of time doing your setup and your preparation work. You can also, with this new version of Midi Quest, say you do have an entire bank full of sounds, and for this particular song, you realize that you're only going to need this particular group. I'm holding down the Control key to do an extended selection there. I now have options to set the patches to transmit, and I can choose selected only. And if I choose this, then when I go to send my entire bank down in the future, only these selected patches will actually be transmitted. So again, the point is you can save time by only sending down those portions of a bank that you actually need to work with. And I'm going to reset that back to transmit all. Midi Quest banks do have an extensive range of capabilities. When you're working within a set, to access these, simply right-click in the bank edit window and you will get a pop-up menu. And you can do all of the typical things. You can undo all of your changes as long as, this is optional, as long as Midi Quest is set up to record those changes in preferences, you can undo. You can copy and paste patches, you can swap patches, clear, select all, restore selected patches to their original state, rename, you have edit options, and these are very important. You have a selection of randomization options, additional organizational options, searching, and standard transmit, receive, and print. So let's give you a brief show and tell. I can select a group of patches, go copy, and I can select another area and simply choose paste, and these patches have now been copied into this area as well. I can also swap patches. You see me do it on a one-on-one basis. Simply, I can click on a patch, drag, I'm going to stop that. There, I'm going to turn auditioning off while we do this, because as you can see, auditioning is great when you want to listen to patches, but when you're trying to do editing, it can get in the way. So I've got CyberStep. I want to put it in location 10. I can click, grab, drag, and drop. The drag and drop has a number of options. I can swap them as I do here, or from preferences, I can instead choose to drag and drop as a paste or drag and drop as an insert. I can also choose arrange, select copy, and if I want to swap, say with the final four, select those, choose swap, and this group of patches has been swapped with these. There's no need for them to be contiguous. You could choose 4 or 5, just like this. From a voice bank, you can do the same thing between banks. Let's say I want this group of patches. I can copy them, go to another bank. I can either choose a particular area and paste, or if I don't select any locations at all and choose paste, in this case they aren't placed anywhere. There are times when Midi Quest will be smart enough to insert in empty locations, but here it wants selections. Edit options. One of the most frequent things you will do is actually be editing a patch. So you can actually double click on any patch and Midi Quest will automatically open it up in an editor, and you can do whatever editing you need. When you're finished, you can store that patch back into the bank, or say if you continued to edit, came back to the voice bank and wanted to edit something else, Midi Quest would give you the option of storing your currently edited patch before you continue on to edit this new patch. When you're working in a performance, you have the same capabilities. I will go back to this performance here, and let me choose happy hour. Double click on that, and here's my performance editor, and I can make whatever changes I want just by grabbing and dragging the controls. But one nice feature is, first off, notice I get all my programs listed by name, so I don't have to choose just by number. And if I actually want to edit, let's say this one, say I want to edit this particular patch, I can double click on it. And Midi Quest will give me this patch to work on. Let's return to our voice banks and look at the randomization options. And here we should reactivate auditioning, and I think I'll stick with chordal auditioning. So there's a couple of different basses. I have a whole series of randomization options that you can either access from the menus or from the buttons here. If I click on Mix, Midi Quest will actually create an entire new bank of patches for me based on mixing the parameters of these two patches. Now, not all of the patches will be usable, as you can plainly hear. But frequently, you will get a range of usable ones, and you can often get those patches much more quickly than if you were to try programming each of them by hand yourself. So let's choose something else. Let's go with, say, a clav. And let's go with these two. We're getting a lot of... To explore the bank's randomization features, I'm going to switch over to the DX7, just because this instrument can be particularly good at showing off the randomization features in Midi Quest. The first option we will look at is Mix. And Mix allows you to choose two instruments. I'm going to say pick these two, strings and piano. And I'm going to press Mix. And I can choose a mix amount between the two selected patches. And the result is a new bank of patches. And you can just click on them and check out the results. Now, these are created by randomly choosing pieces from the two different sounds, and the result is a range of different possibilities, each based on the two that you've selected here. And you can choose two out of the bank. They don't have to be side by side. Now, the next thing I will look at is the Mix All option. And this, you can choose any number of patches from the bank. And I'll just add some extras in here and click on Mix All. And you can see even the names here are mixed. And if I click on them, I've picked a lot more sounds, and the result is, because there's much more variation in the sources, you don't get as many usable patches, and you will find that that frequently happens, but the ones that you do get can sometimes be quite interesting. Well, you'll have to excuse me, I'm no keyboard player, so my playing's not the best. The next option we have is Blend. And Blend also works on 2 patches, but in this case, what it does is it takes larger pieces from the 2 patches you've selected. So the general qualities of the patch tend to be a little more intact in the results. So I'll create a blend and work through these. And you can hear that the results are quite similar. Let's take another 2 more disparate patches. And as you can hear, the mixing of patches does not always work well, and you'll get to know as you work with the program what can be combined well and what can't. And in this example, you get quite a few different usable patches based on your 2 selections. Now, the next option is called Morph, and all the previous randomization options we've looked at have included a random component where the computer generates a number and based on that number chooses pieces. Morph is different in that given any 2 patches, the results are always the same. And what happens is the program starts with the first patch you select and then gradually moves towards the second patch that you select. And there's a morph. And in fact, because it moves in steps, every single parameter, every time you perform the operation, you get exactly the same results. And if you listen, you can hear that the patches are gradually changing. From the first selected patch to the second. Now there are some parameters in a patch which you can't really step through. For example, the DX7 has an algorithm. If you choose 2 patches that have different algorithms, halfway through you will notice a definite change in sound, as you did as I stepped through these, because the program's got to jump from the first algorithm to the second algorithm. It doesn't make sense to morph through the algorithms as far as the sound generating capabilities are concerned. And the last option is Gen 4, and as you might imagine, Gen 4 uses 4 patches. And you get a dialog that looks like this, and based on, again, you're working on creating an entire bank, Based on where you click the mouse in this grid, you will create a patch with those characteristics. So if I click close to Gowan Vibe, I'm requesting a sound that's closer to Gowan Vibe than it is to this fade patch. Or if I click near Analog, I will get a patch that has more components drawn from Analog than from Angel Bell. And I can click as many times as is necessary, or I can hold the mouse button and drag, and when the bank is full, the dialog will disappear and you get your results. Now we'll go back to this dialog, and you actually have two different ways of creating patches here. Mix uses a percentage randomization where each parameter, random numbers are generated, and based on where you click, the selection is biased as to whether the parameter is selected from Analog or Angel or Vibe or Fade. If I choose Blend, it becomes deterministic in the same way that the morph function was deterministic. So if you were to click in a particular position, that position would define the percentage for each parameter that the value is drawn from each of these four patches. So you would always get the same result if you clicked in the exact same position. And your final option here is if you've got a large bank and you've made 20 or 30 choices and you want it to finish up, you can click on this option and the program will automatically fill up the bank on your next click. And you can get your results. Now that we've covered off the major randomization options in the bank, I'm going to go back and look at the motif editors and just talk a little bit about editing itself. The parameter editors will show all of the parameters that go into making the patch or the multi or whatever type of data it is that you're editing. And in each case, we try to choose the appropriate display option for whatever type of parameter it is. Most of the editing is simply you click on a parameter and drag. In this case, I'm dragging left and right. You can also set up Midi Quest so that dragging up and down will work. You get, as you can see here, a pop-up display that shows the current value, and you can configure whether you want that to display or not. Toggle options, you just click and it will switch. When you have text options, you can double-click and get a pop-up to make your selection, or right-click and again get that pop-up to choose the option you want. For knobs, right now I have this configured so that I can drag around in a circular fashion to set the value. You can also configure knobs to be either dragged up and down or left and right, similar to all of the other parameters. For levels, again, click and drag to set. More major selections, just click on the page selector and you'll get the appropriate display, or here you have controllers and you can choose which controller that you want to edit. In some cases, here you'll get a little indicator as to the type of data. If I right click there, I'll get a pop-up covering the entire range. And in situations where you have a lot of information, say in the case of voice selection, you'll get a larger dialog that lets you look through all the possibilities, and you can even enter a filter value. And in this case, I have requested display of only those patches that have base within the name. So here I can look at all of my bases. The other thing you can do here, if you want, is double-clicking on a voice in your list. We need to select a non-preset value. Let's go in here and choose not a preset, get a user value. So if I have a programmable voice selected here and I actually want to edit it, I can double click on it. A dialog will pop up asking me if I want to store the current patch that I've been working on, and I'll say don't save. And here is my Nylon ARP editor. And you also have envelopes that you can drag around by clicking on the corners, knobs. In total, there are some 25 different controls that you can have to work with depending on the type of parameter that you're editing. There are a number of important things that you need to keep in mind about Midi Quest editors. First, we do our best to keep the instrument in sync with the editor as often as possible. So, if the instrument has messages that allow us to update the instrument as we drag this control value, we do it. Those are individual instrument parameter updates. And in most cases, you can do that with instruments, particularly recent ones. In the case of some older instruments, they didn't have parameter update messages. So in that case, it's not feasible every time as you're dragging to send an entire patch. So in that case, what you do is after you've finished changing the parameter value and release the mouse, Midi Quest will then send the entire patch down to the instrument in order to update it. Now, Midi Quest editors are built using what are called skins. So a skin is essentially a collection of bitmaps and color information that define how the instrument looks. The backgrounds here are set up in the skin. The color of these envelopes are defined in the skin. And each editor will either be drawn using the default skin, or you can set up your editor to use a custom skin. That is, that one editor uses just the settings from the skin that you define. This allows you, if you're so inclined, to create your own skins. And you do this from the skin memory here. And if you look, we have a number of different options. If I hit apply, you can get all green backgrounds, or there is a royal blue skin you can have a look at. And a variation on this. So if there's a particular skin that you like working with, you can just select that one. And here we'll have a look at. This is the skin that we used for from Midi Quest 9. And as you can see, bitmaps have changed, the knobs that are used in the editor have changed, the colors of the controls, the text that is used to draw has changed. And all of this is fully controllable, so you can go in and make up your own skin and set things the way you would like them. And I'm going to go back to the default 10 skin. And I'll also show you, let's just add in a line 6 pod, so you can see an example of a custom skin. So here's an editor with a custom skin, and it has all of its own graphics, its own color settings, its own knobs, and all of these are unique to this one particular editor. So if you want, you can also create your own editors that have a particular look on an editor specific basis. Now if you have Midi Quest XL, you can actually create your own editors. That is, create all the library and support and create these panels just as we have. Now in the case of Midi Quest specific editors, those are, SoundQuest specific editors, that is, those that have been created by SoundQuest. You don't have the same level of control, but you can go in and move parameters around, resize things, rearrange the editor, but you can't get into the basic programming on a per control basis. You can only do that if you're creating your own editors. Now the editors also have an extensive collection of options. You can undo the last edit and step back through your edits. You also have an undo history, so you can step back to whatever stage in your editing process that you want. They're the standard copy and paste options. You can perform block copies. So if you say like to set up the element 2 oscillator, you can actually copy all of that to the element 3 oscillator, or element 3 and element 4 if you want. So block copy, there's an extensive list of options, and you can copy to the appropriate destinations. There's a compare option. There are a whole collection of different parameter selection options. You can, in fact, let's just give you an example, select, say if you liked this particular configuration for amplitude 1 and you wanted to use that in amplitude 2 as well, you could select those, go copy, select all of the elements in amplitude 2, and select forced fill, and you can see now that all of the values are identical. Paste and forced fill are subtly different. Forced fill takes the parameters you've copied and forces them into the parameters that you currently have selected. Paste will always paste the parameters that you've selected and copied to the pasteboard into the exact same location. So that is ideal if you select a series of parameters and want to copy them to another patch. Select them, select your go to your destination patch, and then you can just choose paste, and the parameters will paste into the correct location. You can compare between the current patch and the previous patch. You've got a number of randomization options to create new sounds and a whole additional list of options. And we'll look at one more of these. Learn is, I talked about creating your own panels. That's accessed from Panel Edit. Panel Edit is, if you have Midi Quest XL, you'll see it's grayed out right now. Panel Edit, you have to open an individual standalone editor. So if you were to, say, go to the O&W, put it in patch mode, and create a new editor, you'll see Panel Edit is now enabled. You can't open a panel editor, put it in panel edit mode if you will have the patch as part of a set, as part of a collection, as part of a bank editor. Only in standalone mode, and then you can put it in panel edit mode. There's a whole tutorial dedicated to panel editing, so if you want more information on your panel setup, that's where to look. Oops, we'll just cancel out of that. Learn. Every control in Midi Quest can be assigned to a CC number for automation. So if you have a hardware knobs and sliders, a controller, you can link your Midi Quest editors up to your hardware CC generator. Now when you place the program in Learn mode and activate a parameter, anytime Midi Quest receives a CC value, a continuous controller, it will ask you whether you want it to assign the controller to that given parameter, and you can say yes or no, and it will continue to do that until you take the editor out of Learn mode. So that gives you a very powerful option. In some cases, editors will already have certain parameters assigned to certain CC values. You can always override those, and you can also clear all of the Learn settings and return back to the original CCs. That ends the editing portion of the tutorial. I now want to have a look at just a couple of the other major information storage or sysx storage windows that we have within Midi Quest. The first one I want to look at is the library. So I'm going to open up a DX7 library. And what is nice about the library is that it's a single structure that you can use to hold all of your patches. So in this case, I have 5,672 DX7 voices or patches. And I can audition any one of those simply by clicking on it. Now, the libraries are type specific. So you can have, if you have a DX7 voice library, you can't put an M1 combination in it, or you can't put an M1 patch in it. So you have one library for each type of data that you want to work with. This organization allows you to do some very powerful things in the area of searching. If you notice, the library has 8 keys. If you look through 8 of them, I have, and you won't normally use even the 8. For each patch that you bring into your library, you can tag it with descriptive information. So in this case, the sound has brass components, it has clav components, and you might say it's a dark sound or it's a light sound. And you make these assignments here in this keys section. Click on an entry, you get a pop-up dialog, and you can make whatever assignments you want. So you could say, well, it's also got some horn characteristics, and add that in. Later, when you're working on a piece and you want to find all of the sounds of a particular type, you want to get a brass sound, then you can click on Query and say, all right, I'm looking for a horn. Click on OK. And here you have, instead of 600 sounds, you have just the 100 sounds that have horn in them. Now you can assign your keys yourself, but Midi Quest is smart, and as you add patches to your library, it will actually look at the name of the patch and use that to automatically assign key names. So if it sees brass in the name, it will assign brass as a key, or if it sees horn in the name, it will assign horn. So it helps you get started assigning your keys, and this is a real time saver when you're looking for patches to use within a piece of music that you're working on. Within the library, again, you have an extensive set of options: cut, copy, paste, clear. You can open up editors. You can make a series of selections and actually build a new bank based on those selections. So you can quickly make custom banks from your library if that's what you need to do. There are randomization options, essentially the same options as you find within the bank editor. A whole series of options for assigning keys. Export. You can export the names in a number of formats. You can export sysx options, transmission, and saving options. So that covers off the basics of the library. And it, just as a reminder, is aimed at collecting. You want to keep all of the sounds for a particular instrument in one place. It gives you a resource to work from. No. The other main type of window is called a collection. And a collection is quite different. It's an open-ended storage area that lets you save in it whatever you want. Over the years, different people have used it for all sorts of things, but normally what you'll use it for is to create a setup for a song. So you can save anything you want. You want to put a DX7 bank in there, a motif patch bank, an O1W combination bank, whatever you need for a particular piece of music, you can place that in the collection, and it gives you a single file that you can go to that has all of the data that you need for this one particular song. So you can load this up, go to the MIDI menu, say transmit, or transmit your collection, and Midi Quest will go through and transmit everything in the collection out to your instruments and get them updated and prepared for the particular piece of music that you're about to start working on. Again, the collection has an extensive set of options: copy, paste, clear, and various other organizational tools. You probably won't do as much editing from within a collection, but it is ideal for keeping that system. As I said, other people use it for other things. Some people like to keep all of their banks from a particular instrument here. They've kept sequence collections, just anything that you want. It's open-ended. There are no limitations as to what you put in it. And now let's just take a quick look through some of the other menus that you find in Midi Quest. The utility menu contains a series of additional functional windows. The controller lets you generate any type of MIDI event that you want. So you can click on the virtual keyboard to play notes. You can set volume. You can set pan. You can output polypressure. This is MIDI channel 1, 2, all the way through 16. You can send a patch change out if you want. Pitch wheel, aftertouch. This slider can be, in fact, assigned to any continuous controller value that you want. The sequencer window really goes back to the days when you could only run one application at a time. Remember, Midi Quest came out originally in 1989. So if you wanted to play a sequencer, Midi Quest had to play the sequence. These days, if you want to play a sequence, I would recommend go to your sequencer, whatever it is, load up your sequence, play it, and then come back to Midi Quest and do whatever auditioning, sound creation, whatever it is that you want to do. Let your sequencer handle the music. But if you do need a sequencer to load something quickly up and play it, you do have this here. You can control volume levels on each of your 16 channels, muting, pan position. You can load up to 10 different sequences. Simple sequencer. You have two MIDI monitor windows. The first MIDI monitor window gives you the text display of anything that you output. So you can see, if I open up an editor here very quickly, you can actually see the sysx that is being output by the editor. Or if I play some notes, you'll see that. You get timing information, the hex value of what's being output, and the text equivalent. So your note number, your velocity, your MIDI channel, and so on. This window will show output and any MIDI data that is coming into the program. The other monitor is a real-time graphic display, so you can see everything that is going on at a graphic level. You can see what notes are currently being played, aftertouch. The difference is this window only responds to incoming MIDI as opposed to incoming and outgoing MIDI information. Let's close these up. The file conversion window you will find only in Midi Quest XL, and this in many cases will allow you to convert sysx information in a foreign file format into Midi Quest format. You can do this by either writing a macro, or this window has a number of analysis tools that will allow the window to attempt to create the macro for you. It won't work in every instance, but in many cases it does. There's separate tutorial information on using the file conversion window. The instrument creator window is where all of the Midi Quest librarian creation is handled. Here you have a list of instruments. Click on any instrument and it will expand and give you a list of the components in that instrument. Click on any component and you get the definition of that component. Again, this has its own tutorial if you want more information. The remote window, again, Midi Quest XL only, allows you to use MIDI as a remote trigger to load up and output sysx files. This again has its own tutorial, and there are a number of additional options. The online menu allows you to directly access main Midi Quest pages for upgrading. This will take you to SoundQuest main page, registration, and check for updates and service packs. The options menu brings up your preferences, where you set up all of the options within Midi Quest, usually on a window type basis. And as you saw previously, this is where you can set up your own patch skins, and this is also where you set up your key lists. And the key list is where you make your key assignments for the library. So you can have categories, and for each category you can assign as many keys as you want. And although I'm not going to show you, the last thing I want to talk about briefly is plugins. In Midi Quest XL, we include plugins to support VST, MFX, and Yamaha's new standard plugin format. With these plugins, you can actually have Midi Quest integrated into virtually any sequencer that you might be using. And this allows you to access and automate the editing of your sysx information from within your sequencer. You can have entire blocks, voices, banks triggered to download at a particular time in your sequence. You can automate the editing of any parameter, have it recorded as VST automation information, and have it played back, so your parameter will change in real time. There's a lot of very powerful functionality there. Again, there's an entire tutorial dedicated to the plugin capabilities of Midi Quest XL. Thank you for viewing this tutorial.